Our Wednesday regulars on Breaking Politics join us now. Joel Fitzgibbon is the Labor MP in the New South Wales electorate of the Hunter. And in Victoria, in Melbourne in fact, in Kooyong, is Joshua Frydenberg, the Liberal MP there. Welcome back to both of you. Joel Fitzgibbon, if I can start with you, is it responsible, in light of the budget problems, for the government to now dump the proposed tax cuts, $1.4 billion worth, linked to carbon pricing?
Well, Tim, fiscal discipline is certainly responsible. I've seen this speculation in the Australian Financial Review today. I can't really comment much on it, of course. I don't know whether it's factual and what the plans are. I'm afraid your viewers will just have to wait until Tuesday night to get all those answers.
But were it to happen, you'd regard it as a reasonable piece of fiscal discipline?
Well, again, I can only say, Tim, that fiscal discipline is important. I wouldn't argue with that, but it's pretty hard sitting outside the budget process when you don't know what the choices are to really pass any comment, particularly when we don't even know whether this is confirmed. We don't know that it's confirmed by the Treasury. We don't know whether it's even true.
True, in as much as the Prime Minister's office and the responsible Minister's office aren't confirming the claims this morning. But Joel Frydenberg, I guess this is already looking like a big broken promise, another big broken promise from the opposition's point of view.
Absolutely, Tim. The point here is that the government has been hugely embarrassed by the collapse in the carbon price in Europe. All their revenue assumptions have been based on a much higher price here in Australia. So they're now scrambling around where to find savings. The government doesn't have a revenue problem, though. It is a spending problem, and it's been spending too much money for too long, and now it's having to claw back on its promises. And it's a huge embarrassment for them, and you just can't take the government at face value with anything that it says.
I know you say that it has a spending problem, not a revenue problem, but a $17 billion write-down in 1 year is a pretty big problem, isn't it? That is a big setback to a budget.
Tim, actually the revenue is 7.5% greater than it was last year. That's the fact. It might be a $17 billion on what the government predicted, but it's a 7.5% increase in revenue on last year. And the government has now got a revenue that is more than $70 billion higher than in the last year of the Howard government. Spending's more than $100 billion higher than the last year of the Howard government. So, the figures tell a very different story than what you hear from Penny Wong and Julia Gillard.
Joel Fitzgibbon, Treasury's revenue forecasts were way off. We've had the promised family tax benefits changes gone. The promised surplus has disappeared. Now we have this doubt over carbon-related tax cuts. Aren't Australians going to say, what can we believe in next Tuesday's budget, given the recent history?
Well, Tim, the government relies on the same Treasury modelling as did the Howard government. You can only work from the advice given. We were to understand that revenues would be much higher. It doesn't matter what they were in the Howard years, they were going to be much higher. And we'd allocated some of those revenues to important areas of expenditure. Josh keeps being on about the government spending too much money, but he never cares to nominate where we should be spending less money. Which programs is he going to cut? Whose tax cuts is he going to remove, etc.? He'll run the stimulus package in response in a moment, but you see the Reserve Bank now putting more stimulus into the economy, which surely is confirmation that the Australian economy needs both fiscal and monetary stimulus. We've been on that correct path. Now, unfortunately, the forecasts on revenue haven't been forthcoming, haven't run true in the end, and we're going to have to make some adjustments as a result.
Joshua Frydenberg, do you want to take the Joel Fitzgibbon challenge and nominate some spending cuts here and now that the government ought to engage in?
Well, we'll give the government a big $70 billion cheque by cutting their NBN and creating our own NBN. That's the first one. We've already said that low income tax offsets will be cut because we can't sustain it with the mining tax not producing the revenue that it was predicted to do so. We've also said that we will cut the number of public servants because there's been a blowout there. The point here is we will not make promises that we can't keep. And you mentioned the family tax benefits. The Prime Minister has embarrassingly written to her own electorate, Tim, suggesting 23,000 people will actually get a payment that they're now not going to get. I mean, how bad is that? And, you know, what concerns the coalition is not just the budget, the state of the budget, but what's off balance sheet. And the Clean Energy Finance Corporation is a $10 billion commitment by this government to back, you know, individual technologies, to take a punt on individual technologies. That's actually off balance sheet. And so that's also going to come out of taxpayers' pockets. So we're really concerned that this government has no credibility whatsoever when it comes to the fiscal position.
If you are as concerned as you say you are on the budget situation, what then do you say about the Parliamentary Budget Office apparently costing Tony Abbott's paid parental leave scheme at not $3.4 billion, but more than $5 billion a year, and likely to cost the 3,200 biggest companies in our country a lot more, perhaps double the 1.5% tax increase they were supposed to face?
Well, I certainly believe that the paid parental leave scheme will be an important productivity link measure and workforce participation measure, which will actually grow the economic pie for Australia. I mean, you have to understand, Tib, you know, in Australia, there are much less women in the workforce than men. Some 67% of working age women are in the workforce compared to 78% of men. And of those women, only 55% of them are working full-time compared to 85% of men. Now, what we need to do is get more women in the workforce, because if we can grow the workforce, we can grow the economic pie. So I support the paid parental leave scheme. We believe we've got it properly costed, we've got it properly funded, and you'll see more details of that in the lead up to the election.
Joel Fitzgibbon?
Well, Tim, I asked Josh to nominate savings, and his two priorities was an inferior national broadband network for Australia's consumers, and the second was to hit the super tax concessions for the lowest paid in our country. Then he went on to say that he wanted to spend $5 billion allocating paid parental leave entitlements to people, as Tony Abbott has indicated, at the higher end of town, the high-flying executive, female executives, that Tony Abbott wants to be more prominent in the business community, while at the same time imposing a massive tax on companies who are going through a pretty tough time at the moment. So I'm just happy to let Josh talk.
Perhaps we should let Tony Abbott talk for a moment, given his the fuss that centres around this comment he made yesterday in relation to paid parental leave. Let's have a listen to it.
Our fair income paid parental leave scheme is a sign that the Coalition gets it when it comes to the reality for modern women and the reality for modern Australian families. We do not educate women to higher degree level to deny them a career. Now, if we want women of that calibre to have families, and we should, well, we've got to give them a fair income chance to do so, and that's what this scheme of paid parental leave is all about. It's long overdue. It's long overdue, and I am proud that the Coalition has come swiftly into the 21st century where this is concerned.
Did you see anything offensive in that comment, Joel Fitzgibbon?
Well, Tim, what was offensive was not so much what Tony Abbott said, but what he omitted to say. He indicated by his own words that he was entirely focused on women at the big end of town, the high flyers in the business community. Now, we all support them and we all wish them well, and they are a very, very important part of the Australian economy, and they are part of our drive for greater productivity. But he should have mentioned the hundreds of thousands of other women at the lower end getting up in the morning and driving to work and cleaning the hospitals or whatever they might be doing. That they are just as important, Tim. So his mistake was the omission, and I think it really said something about Tony Abbott. It really said something about the nature of his scheme and the motivations behind it. And of course, it reminds us all of the intervention of Alex Hawke and others who have belled the cat and called this silly scheme for exactly what it is.
His wife is a childcare worker, Joel. She's going to be one of the people, or people who are childcare workers are going to be one of the types of people who are going to benefit. People who work in rail, teachers, police officers, people who are getting above the minimum wage will do much better under our scheme. They're not rich, Joel, but they're people who are having children and they want to get into the workforce, and we're encouraging them to do so.
And he should have been talking about them yesterday. I mean, this is the problem. He he exposed his real view of Australia's society and the Australian economy by his very own words. He had the opportunity to put the very points that Josh has just put to us, but he failed to do so. And I think it says a lot about Tony Abbott and the motivation behind his scheme.
Joshua Frydenberg, perhaps a closing comment on whether this is a commentary on Tony Abbott in some way or not?
No matter what he says, they'll be out there to make a cheap political point, but the reality is the parental leave scheme under a coalition government will be much better suited to the Australian workforce, will be much more enhancing for the Australian economy, and will lift productivity and lift our workforce participation.
Joel Fitzgibbon and Joshua Frydenberg, as always, very grateful for you taking time to speak to us on this Wednesday. We'll talk next week in the wake of the federal budget.
It's a pleasure, Tim.
Thanks, Joel.
Good to see you, Josh.